Hello, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about non-alcoholic beer production. My name is Josh Hagan. May I ask, what is non-alcoholic beer? Simply, it's beer that is made with a concentration of alcohol less than 0.5% by volume. Here are a couple of lists of examples that you may have seen that are popular amongst the crowds now. Two different ways of making non-alcoholic beer are through physical production and biological production. So the physical method is making a normal alcoholic beer and then de-alcoholizing it using a heating process. Some things you need to know is that during this process, added bitterness is going to be found through the hops, so and a change in the recipe is going to be needed doing that. You can also do this biological method where you're going to use a yeast or microorganism that doesn't produce alcohol or ethanol as a production of fermentation. So here we're looking at a basic diagram of a brewery. So malt is added to the grain mill where it's smashed, and the endosperm and starch is going to be extracted from the husks. From there, it's going to be transferred to the mash tun. We don't have a hot liquor tank shown. Essentially, it's just a big hot water pot. So hot water is going to be added from the hot liquor tank and transferred to the mash tun. Inside the mash tun, you're going to have the enzymatic activity that comes with the grain. It's going to start converting all of the starches into sugars. And so after the sugar conversion has finished, it's going to be transferred to the lauter tun, which is that middle tank or that middle pot. So the lauter tun, its purpose is to separate the husk from the wort. And so the wort is going to be extracted from the lauter tun and pulled into the boil kettle, leaving behind the husks of the grain. During the boiling process, you're going to be sterilizing the wort and adding hops and maybe additional sugars depending on the recipe. So maltodextrin can add a little bit more body. Lactose, you can make like milk stouts and such like that. So after the boiling process, it's going to be sent into the whirlpool. Here it's labeled the cyclotron precipitation. Essentially what's going to happen is it's going to rotate inside this pot in such a manner that the solids are going to manifest inside the center of the pot, and then you're going to be left with a clear liquid on the outside. So you're going to extract the clear liquid, and it's going to go through the heat exchanger where it's going to cool down to below room temperature. Now that's important because when you pitch the yeast, you want to make sure that it doesn't die. So it's transferred into its primary fermenter, and the yeast is added, at which point fermentation happens. That'll take anywhere from 2 weeks to a little bit longer, maybe 18 days, depending on the strength of the beer and the concentrations of sugar. So from there, you can go into the maturity stage, and that could be something as simple as racking off of the yeast from the bottom. You don't necessarily have to transfer it to a secondary container. So at this point, you can add, wood chips if you want to do a bourbon barrel aged, something like that. You can actually transfer it to bourbon barrels. You can add cocoa nibs for chocolate. You can add fruit purees. So there's different things you can do. And the reason why you want to pull it off the yeast is if you're going to do an extended aging period, the yeast will autolyze and it will cause off flavors that can contribute to wet cardboard flavors. So, and that, no one wants that in their beer. So at this point, you're going to transfer it to the filter, and you're going to pull out any of the remaining yeast or proteins and stuff like that. And then it's going to be packaged and sent on for distribution. Now, with the physical production of non-alcoholic beer, the only thing that would be changed here is prior to this filtration process, it would go back to the boil kettle. Ethanol has a uh, uh, boiling point of 173.3 degrees Fahrenheit. So the idea is you want to hold it, your fermented beer at this point, at 175 degrees for 15 to 20 minutes, at which point you're going to cool it down, go back through this process, go through the cooling process. You're going to bypass the fermentation tanks and just go straight into the filtration back into packaging. So that's essentially brewing in a nutshell. Here we're looking at the different types of non-Saccharomyces yeasts used in the production of non-alcoholic beer. More importantly, we're going to be talking about the Saccharomycotis ludwigi. So before we do that, though, we need to look at what is wort and how do we understand what we're talking about. So wort is the sugary water liquid that is made from the extraction of the grain. Now, it's measured in specific gravity, degree Plato, Balling, or Brix. Plato, Balling, and Brix are pretty much the same thing as far as we're concerned. They differ around like the fourth decimal place, but for us, it's essentially the same thing. Specific gravity is a lot like density. So the density of water is 1.000. So as sugar is added to the wort, the density goes up. So that's why you can see here in this example 1.065, 65 gravity points is almost equivalent to 17 Plato. So the correlation is roughly 4 gravity points per 1 degree Plato. So here a 6.6 degree Plato wort is going to have a production of 0.5% ABV. So this is what we need to be paying attention to: the amount of sugar that goes in and the amount of ethanol that comes out. Another thing that's worth looking at is the diacetyl production. And so diacetyl is most commonly known as that buttery flavor. So when you go to get popcorn at the movie theater, it tastes a lot like salty, buttery popcorn. So this has a low diacetyl or no detectable threshold. Once you look at the 11.5 Plato wort, this one does have a noticeable diacetyl production, and most importantly, it exceeds the 0.5%, so it's no longer considered a non-alcoholic beer. This is a low alcohol beer now. Looking at this 12.2 Plato wort, this is an interesting way of going about it because they're using a physical and biological method in combination. So this was fascinating because they had taken a 9% ABV beer and blended it with a biological beer and brought it back down to 0.5%. So this is has a pretty much a same profile as a regular beer, as taste profile is what they talked about. So one of the things that we need to discuss now is cost. If we're going to actually pursue this, the R&D cost for a startup of 5 small 40 milliliter yeast cultures is going to be 310 euros. Most of that is going to be extra fees associated with it. So we'll get to that here in just a second. Once we decide to go that route, if we want to continue to operation and production, my recommendation is going with an agar slant. That way we could continue to culture our own yeasts. It's 140 euros here. We can purchase the cryo pearls or the press yeasts. Those have a longer shelf stability, but it's also going to be a lot more expensive. So if we do go this route, my recommendation is getting slants and continuously making starters and having replacement slants sent out on occasion. Now, this is where this kills us here. The FedEx Express shipping overnight across the ocean, you're looking at 180 euros. The FDA registration is 35 euros. and the phytosanitary certificate, that's 20 euros, and that's just certifying that it's going to be ecologically safe for the plants. This is through a certification for international trade, so something that they want to make sure it's not going to harm any other country's bioproducts. I just want to say thank you for listening, and I hope this helped with your guys' decision.